He's a member of the Applied Software Engineering Research Group.
Yeah.
And this group is part of the Open API initiative, which is under the umbrella of the Linux Foundation. And okay, Pablo will make a presentation of this initiative that I think is very interesting, and also they are so kind that they have offered this little party. So Pablo, would you want?
Well, thank you very much, Carlos. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your time. So the Open API initiative, it's a brand new effort by many big players in the industry, and the main goal behind it is fostering this vendor-neutral ecosystem of APIs. And this is quite interesting because the fundamental motivation behind of them, this is taken directly from the webpage, is that the Open API initiative was created by a consortium of forward-looking industry experts who recognize the immense value of standardizing and how REST APIs are described. And as an open governance structure under the Linux Foundation, the OAI is focused on creating, evolving, and promoting the vendor-neutral description format. This is a very strong statement because if you look at the members, the current members, is quite, I would say that the main players in the software industry, and it's a really increasing member number. I have just to update this slide yesterday because 3 more members appear, and it's really impressive if you take into account that it's 1.5 year initiative. So I think it is quite interesting to look at least to see what is going to be with this specification and how the industry in general embrace their specification, etc. Well, so let me divide this talk in different topics. First, I'm going to just motivate what are the benefits of having such a specification in a vendor-neutral context. Then I will look a little bit about the history, why they get into this OAI. Then I will just have a glimpse of the specification, the main parts, the current version. And with that in mind, we will discuss a little bit one of the most interesting thing, in my opinion, that is the tooling that we already have. We have a very, very nice ecosystem of tools, and just a short hands-on to see how can we, using these toolings, we can create an API in minutes, and a fully working API, and that's pretty amazing. And finally, we will just review how can we contribute on the initiative, which are the possibilities in terms of involvement. And specifically, I will just do some showcase from a research perspective. What kind of contributions could we expect in such a specification? Well, talking about benefits, I will just borrow a couple of visuals from Nginx blog. They have a very, very nice story about microservice and how they present it with examples. I think it's pretty nice. So let's go back a little bit to this morning, because in the talk by Chris, it was quite interesting the evolution to microservice architecture. Actually, it was amazing because the Nginx, they have exactly that example of a Uber-like scenario. So if we look back into some years ago, not so much, the traditional monolithic applications where if you want to do a nice architecture, the tendency was to create the so-called hexagonal architecture, where you have the endpoints outside of the core business logic. It is nice in terms of separate concerns in layers, but the problem, and I'm not going to insist because Chris did pretty well this morning, it's the complexity, how it evolves, the scalability problem that you have, and in general the evolution. Every time you need to change anything, you need to rebuild, deploy, etc. And that's very, very, very harsh in terms in nowadays. So as an evolution, we can find this microservice architecture where the different logic is isolated in pieces that can be deployed, evolved, etc. And it's as a de facto standard, the interfaces that use these pieces, these microservices, we could say that is REST APIs. Because there was a moment in time where we have the two lines of WSDL, SOAP world, and you have the REST APIs. I would say it's not very risky to say that the industry tendency is clear towards the REST API. In my opinion, is because it's much more easy to use by developers. And at the end, it's not about the power of some technology, but also the ease of use. So yes, I'm sure most of you know pretty well what is a RESTful API, but I just want to spend one slide of REST API 101 in case you are not familiar, and for the rest to see that we are on the same page when we are talking about REST API. So, well, the REST API in the REST paradigm, all the different concepts are traditional concepts that you could find in a model with properties, are translated and accessible by URLs. And typically you have like a version as part of this URL. And the main thing is that you can access this kind of concepts by the HTTP verbs, no? And the typical things are if you want to operate over the whole range of resources of the same type, you access a base URL, and you can, with POST, you can create new resources. With GET, you can get the whole list of resources of that type. And if you invoke delete, you delete the whole set of resources. It is not, from a best practices point of view, it's not pretty nice to use the put method in that for the whole list of resources. And in the case that you want to operate over a single resource, over a single element, you access explicitly with a specific URL to that resource, and you can do some get to get the information of that resource. You can do some put to update the data of this resource, or delete if you want to delete that specific resource. Then with the idea of the URLs is very powerful to do in a simple way the most typical things that you have in data management in typical applications. So for example, if you want to do some bulk, you don't want to process the whole list of resources, and you want to just do some pages of resources, you can use, for example, the queries and some parameters of limit and offset. If you want to, for example, extract a specific part of the resource, let's say that you have very complex resources and you want to get the whole list of resources with only one part of the resource, like a view of the resource, you can use the fields property. And for example, if you want to, and this is, I think, one of the most interesting things, if you want to link together different resources using the hierarchy, the natural hierarchy of the URLs, you can, for example, link, and if you show this to a user, it's really clear what it represents. If I do a get over this resource, what I get is the logins results, resources from that are tied to a user resource. So we can mix together and navigate through the resources with the URLs, and that's also pretty interesting. So with that in mind, now that we are on the same page in terms of REST APIs, this microservice architecture, I assume that every microservice will have this REST API and will rely on other REST APIs. So what is the benefits? What are the benefits of using an OpenAPI specification, tied together with the REST API? Well, the main benefit is that you get all the power of the ecosystem of tooling that you already have with the OpenAPI specification. For example, I will give you 3 specific examples. One, you can do some scaffolding, for example, and in some of the talks of today, they mentioned that you have some toolings that you model your API with the specification. You generate a fully functional mock-up of your API that you can start fill in and create the first prototype. Actually, that is one of the things that we're going to do today. Then you can also, for example, another tool can help you to generate a documentation site for your developers automatically. So your developers have all the list of methods, testing, etc. And finally, another very, very interesting thing is that you can also have testing, automatic testing. There are some toolings that get the specification and generate a set of minimal tests to your API. We will show these 3 possibilities in the hands-on. But in general, I'm going to just to see where we are, I'm going to have a very, very quick review of the OAI history. Well, everything started in around 2011, where the specification called Swagger was proposed by a company. This specification was a very simple API, REST API definition, and it quickly gained some traction. And around 2 years later, 2-3 years later, around 2014, with the hand of SmartBear, that was the company in that point of time that was evolving the specification. It gained a lot of traction and was very accepted by the different players. But in that point in time, they decided, I think it was a very, very nice move, to leave the specification to an open consortium. So the specification could be vendor neutral. They have the Swagger has evolved into an ecosystem of tools. Nowadays, you have the Swagger tools that are very powerful, and they use the specification. But the idea was to free the specification to an open process and embrace different companies on that. And in that point in time, around 2016. The Linux Foundation created the OpenAPI initiative, and they started as the first version of the specification, the OpenAPI specification version 2. That is the same than Swagger 2. So every time you see a Swagger 2 file, we could say that this is also an OpenAPI version 2 specification. So in that point in time, this powerful consortium of members start working and evolving the specification. And here we are in 2017, in July, they just released the version 3.0. And this is the one that I'm going to present. And they have, this version has interesting extensions, and it opened things that are very common in APIs that wasn't present in V2. Well, so let's dive into the specification, just to see some examples. I'm not going to show a comprehensive list of features. In any case, it's not very complex. You can see the specification, and in the slides that we will provide, you have the links to everything. So I'm going to just focus on the minimal thing that you can use to make an OpenAPI specification work. So, well, basically, the OpenAPI document specification is a JSON file or a YAML. It's the same, and they have this file should have 4 different parts and start with the property OpenAPI. By the way, I'm going to use YAML. That is, in my opinion, much easier to read. With this line, you're saying that this is a file for the specification. The first part, the info part, it's a section where you say the version of your API and a description. This is the mandatory elements. And then you can specify optional things like, for example, the licensing that you're going to put in your API, and also the endpoints in a link. Well, you can have one endpoint, different endpoints, even parameterize endpoints for production, for testing, etc. But mainly, these are the first Open API, and the info elements are the mandatory. Then you have the other mandatory element, that is the paths section. In the paths section, you do the review of the different resources that you're going to expose. So, for example, in this case, we have one resource that is pets, and it will allow a get operation over it. You can have some description. Operation ID is something that is optional and is for linking to some tooling. So one of the tools that we're going to use, create an scaffold and assume the existence of an operation called get pets in your code. So that's the way they link together your code with the scaffolding. Then another mandatory element for the paths is the response. At least you have to have one response for every method associated with a URI. And for example, well, the typical thing, the default one is 200. And in this case, you can also specify the contents of the result of that resource. In this case, they are this resource of get pets will return an array of elements of type pets. This way of specifying the structure of the data is relying on another specification that is widely used, that is JSON schema. JSON schema is a way of specifying the structure of a JSON object. So you can rely on this specification to create complex structures. And if you want, you can have a default response where you can have some, for example, for the error model. No? As you can see here, you have some references in these elements, and these references are to the component section of the file. This component sections is widely used in order to reuse different schemas the whole along the different paths, because typically you will have all sort of operations over the same resource. So in order to avoid repeat the same schema all over again in the whole specification, you can have this component, and then you have the reusable element for the schemas. For example, another example of a parameterized resource. Whenever you want to, for example, access a specific resource, you can have parameterized in the URI and in the URL. And this parameter, the only thing you need to do is to specify the type of typically is a string, and then the same again. Just to have a final part of an example, this is how the component looks like. The components, they rely on the JSON schema, and in this case, the pet that you're going to use in the paths that you have seen, it has some properties, and the properties are required. Right? In this case, every pet has an ID, a name, mandatory, and then also they can have, well, in this case, only two properties of type. So this is, I'm not going to go in detail, because you can go to JSON schema to see all the details. But let me just go through three new features that are new to this version 3, that are advanced issues but are very useful in real cases. Apart from this element, these 4 parts of the specification, version 3 also introduced the idea of links, and this is really interesting if you want to do some, if you want to create connections between the different paths. So this is quite aligned with the original philosophy of REST, because you can have this transfer of a state between different elements. So for the first time, you can introduce these links and this operational semantics. So every time, for example, a user access a resource, you can tell him that you can also access these two other dynamic paths, and the translation of the path is done automatically. And so for complex APIs, this is really good. Then they also introduced the idea of callbacks. For the first time, you can also specify how you can have specific paths that require a callback to the person that is calling. This is very useful if you want, for example, an asynchronous operation that is going to take a long time. That you do the operation, the REST operation, and you specify your endpoint to be called, and this is typically called a hook or webhook. This is also that is part of the new specification, how to specify the callbacks in a standard way. And finally, also security has been improved a lot. Version 2 has some security mechanism, but in version 3, different elements has been incorporated. So now you can have security based on HTTP authentication, the API keys, the simple way, OAuth, and OpenID is for parts. So let's go to one of my favorite sections. The good thing about this is that once you have the specification done for your API, you can benefit for a wide set of toolings. Specifically, we could find 4 types of toolings. Tools. Editors, we can have some apps that allow you to easily create the spec. You don't need to know and dive into the JSON and the YAML. You can have a graphical way to specify the API, and it generates a valid OAIs. You can have also some low-level tools, so to do some parsing, some generation. You can have some user interfaces tools that are widgets or components that can work together with the specification. So, for example, you can render the specification for a user-friendly way for a developer, for the document, for the reference guide. And finally, you can have code generators. That's one of the most powerful things. You have tools for many languages. You get the specification and create the scaffolding in the different languages. I'm going to just give you 4 examples, one for each of the elements. You can have the whole list in the specification website. There are different languages: Java, TypeScript, C#, several languages. Let's go to the example. So, for example, from the editor perspective, one brand new tool, because it was released a month ago, 2 months ago, is Epicurio Studio that is made by Red Hat, and they have created this visual environment where you can just clicking, and you don't need to know a lot about the specification, and it guides you through the creation of the API design. And they work with both V2 and V3 and can register that specification in a repository, in a GitHub repository. From the perspective of user interface tooling, a good example is Lincoln. Lincoln is a tool that allows you in interfaces with the React framework that you create with a React framework. It allows you to create like a widget where you render the specification in a very beautiful way. So you can send this URL to developers, and they see how to work with your API. From the perspective of code generation, Swagger was the first and the most powerful. They have created a set of different tools, and one of them that is very powerful is the editor, but they have different projects for the generator itself. You can isolate the generator. We will see that in the demo, that you can put the specification and generate to a list of more than, I would say, 20 languages, different languages. And from the perspective of low level, an example could be the OATS or Open API test templates. That is very interesting because it allows the developer with an Open API specification to generate automatically a set of test cases for the typical things in a REST API. And it is without any other information than the Open API specification. You have a minimal starting point to test your API, and that's very interesting. You just generate, and then you get the test ready to be launched. We will hopefully show that in the hands-on. Well, so any questions so far or comment, or shall we move into any? Are you comfortable with the ham and the beer and everything? You have energy. Yes.
Yeah, one question.
Yes.
Can you give us some reference book for students who want to know Open APIs?
Well, yes, absolutely. In the web page, I will show you at the end. It's on most of the slides. You have the different tutorials and different documentations and examples, minimal examples to
Is there any comprehensive reference books about it? I accessed Amazon, but I failed to find anything about it.
To the best of my knowledge, no. There's no comprehensive step-by-step. Well, my idea was to record. I'm actually recording this, so we're going to put short videos of the tutorial into the website. So perhaps that's one thing. But now there's a lot of movement, and many people is doing some posts and examples and tutorials.
The tutorial I accessed the official site, so it has a lot of webinars we can access.
Yeah.
But in some places, for example, in China, we cannot access it from YouTube.
Wow.
We cannot from Google.
Wow.
So for students, it's very hard. So if
Wow.
you have any digital version of some books or documents, we can follow.
Okay. Well, I could present that concern to the consortium because it's very interesting to open in a widely accessible way all the information. That's definitely a good point. Well, any other comment before the hands-on, or no? Let's dive in then. Well, so I'm not sure. Is some of you are going to follow just to be more relaxed, or well, just stop me please if I'm too quick. Okay. Well. What I'm going to use in this hands-on, the main goal is to show how, with a very minimal amount of effort, we can have a fully functional API. I say here in 5 minutes. I will try to do it in 5 minutes. It depends on the network, and also I'm gonna do some tricks. So if you allow me. Sorry? Well, I will show you that. No, I will provide you with the data to do the tricks as well. So well, I'm going to use the. Let me check here. The Cloud9 environment. This Cloud9 it's a very nice environment to do some tests, and also for the one that teach some web developer or microservices courses, is pretty good for the students as well to work, because it doesn't need any installation and it's ready to use. So once you have, and also they have some teacher license, so for $1 per month you can have any number of repositories for your students. Is really good. So with this Cloud9 you can create a new workspace. Let's see, now is when I'm going to be very adventurous in this demonstration because everything is relying on the network. So I'm sorry in advance if something goes wrong. So basically it's very easy to create a new workspace. You just do a name. For example, I'm gonna call it OAI Exoc. And in general, you can choose a runtime language, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to just use the default one, the HTML5. This is Cloud9. What they do is they generate a container for you, and you can start coding right away. Let's see. This is a good point to do some jokes or about APIs or any questions. Typically, it's less than 1 minute. So, okay, great. So as we can see, is a typical environment. I'm not going to stop explaining Cloud9. So, what you have here is let me put that on a bigger screen just to and a little bit bigger so you can see it. I'm going to remove and delete all the different assets that you have by default. So here we're going to create this API, and in order to do that, we're going to use one of the first tools I was showing you. The first tool is called Swagger, and they have an editor that is pretty good to create the scaffolding. We're going to use the version, the old version, because they are moving to the V3, but the generation now is currently available for V2. So everything that I'm going to do here is V2. So if you go to editor2.swagger.io, you can open the tool. It takes a little bit the first time you run it, and now meanwhile you're looking at it. I've just created a gist. This is the trick that I'm going to provide you. I provide you with some elements in advance in order to satisfy the 5 minutes requirement. So basically here, what I've created is an Open API specification for a very simple API. And this API is going to be an API to create boats over talks, and it will allow for anybody to post boats, and we could get the results of the boats. So in order to get this gist, if you go to gist.github, I'm going to put this in a big editor, Notepad, for example, here. If you go to this link, you will see the examples, the code examples I'm using. If you go to the default service JS OA at Exoc, okay. So did you copy the link? You have it. github.com. This is my user. So in here you have to click on default service JS, and you have all the sample that I'm going to use. Specifically, one of the key point here is a YAML example. If you press the raw button here, you can access the specific example. So let's see if the Swagger, perfect. So if the Swagger editor has opened for you, you will see it divides the screen with an editor on the left part, and then you have this thing on the right part. We will stop there later on. Since I'm creating the API before the talk, I already have it. But the only thing you need to do is just copy the whole specification of API and paste it here. Pass it here. Okay. So if everything is good, the only thing you need to do to generate the scaffolding is the generate server. As you can see, there are multiple technology stacks, and specifically I'm going to use the Node.js that is very lightweight to do the example. So once you do this, what you have is a fully functional mockup for your API. So once you have downloaded the code, The only thing you need to do in Cloud9 is just upload it, and then you have your zip file with the mockup. So if we unzip the mockup, then you can have this this new folder. I'm gonna rename it just for the sake of simplicity to, for example, talk votes. And inside of these talk votes, we have this scaffolding. Well, what do we need to make it work? Well, in Node.js, you need to have this command install all the dependencies of the packages that depend this application, and is typically pretty quick. Now is downloading and putting on the folder the Swagger middlewares and everything that the scaffold needs. So a new folder, Node modules, is generated. Well, that's it. That's the only thing we need to run the application. So now we can in the folder. There's an index.js that is the main entry point to the application, and we can do a run, and this will start the application. Let's clean this a little bit just to make it easier. And that's it. It's already deployed. So I can go to this link, and apparently there's nothing there, because I didn't specify any endpoint for the root resource. But if I go to docs, I have the Swagger generated documentation, and this is one of the most interesting things. For example, I didn't need to specify anything about testing, anything like that, and now I have a ready-to-use portal that I can send to developers to start to show how the API works. In this case, the API will have 3 different operations. I can post a vote, so I can say, for example, OAI and vote 10. I can post again, for example, with an 8. I can get the results of a vote. And as I can see, everything apparently works. Well, if you look at the data, it doesn't work because it's examples that they are rendering. But you have a fully functional testing platform for your API. Now, this is a complete mock-up. But the good thing is that you have with this scaffold, you have validation embedded. So, for example, if I put, instead of 8, I put 15. And try it out, I get an error because the maximum number is 10. So you can, in the specification, you can do the maximum, minimum data. So it's a layer it's a very convenient layer of validation. So what do we need to make this work for real? Well, if we look at the structure of the code generated, everything is generic, except, well, we have a folder where we have the API Swagger YAML. If we open it, we see the actual YAML that the actual specification, OAI specification v2 that we have generated. I mean, sorry, that we have written, that I provided to you. This is the only thing we need to modify if we want to add more resources, more to change the data types. This is the only thing. And for each path that you have specified in the controllers folder, a file default is generated. This is because, because I've put the Swagger this line in the specification just to group the different methods. So if I go to default.js, what I see, it's a generic just middleware to link the roots with internal functions of my code. And if I go to the default service, this is where all the code is done. So I can see a default code generated where, for example, delete votes doesn't do anything, get results just return a sample data, and register vote doesn't do anything at all. So in order to speed things up and not make it very boring at this time, I've just created a skeleton of the behavior. It's very simple. You can see that the sample code is, in case you want to delete votes, what I do, well, all the data will be stored in memory in a map. And in case I want to delete the votes, the only thing I do is just reset with a new array the votes of the resource. In case I want to return the result of a voting, I just do a count, an average, and a count of the votes. And in case I want to register a vote, the only thing I do is just push the vote into the map. It's very, very simple, the code. So if I get this code, example, and passed it into the default service JS, I have a fully working API right now. So if I rerun the server, then I have, now I can start working with the API. So for example, if I vote, for example, 5, 7, then I can get the results here. I have now a valid API working. So this is, well, you will see. I don't know if it took 5 minutes or not with the trick of the code, but more or less, I hope you get the idea. So this is related with the generation of the whole code. But let me show you another tooling that is very interesting. If you go to the shell, let's try to do some testing. As I mentioned before, I want to do some minimal testing over this API, and we're going to use this tool that is called OATS, OATTS. This is the way we install tools in the Node environment. We are downloading the command and installing into the system. And also this tool uses one package that is called Chakram to do some requests, and also basically we need a test runner, and we use the Mocha test runner. So just install these three. This is the last one globally. And with these three things, we have ready to go a testing platform. How can we use it? For the only thing we need to do with the OATS command is to say where is the, I'm going to say generate based on the Swagger file, the specification file. I want to write the test into the test folder. And you have to specify where is the application running. That is basically the host name where you want the test to run. With that in mind, the OATS generate these test cases there in the folder, and we can run it straightforward with Mocha. And there we have three different tests that are generated for example, testing if you do some get to a talk ID, it should return 200. If you go to do some post with no data, should return an invalid vote, and if you do some delete, it should return 200 if everything goes okay. And actually, if you see the test folder, just to see an example, it generates fake IDs just to test your, for example, this is testing this fake talk ID in the test case. And I have to say, well, it is really, really, really useful. When I was preparing the talk, thanks to this tool, I detect several mistakes in my API implementation with the default. But the good thing about Oats is a template system. You have a catalog and you can extend with more templates, so you can have a wide range of tests. Well, with that in mind, well, this is the hands-on I had prepared, just to check whether you like it or not. I would like to do some test with you. Can you access with a mobile phone or with a laptop or to this link if you can? Did you access it? So this is I have deployed this API to Heroku, and is running. So just to do some check with all of you, if you go to this link, let me copy paste. You will see this web page, right? So if you press in default, let's do some voting over this talk. So for example, let's everybody use the talk ID, for example, OAI at ICSoc, for example, something like that. If you do that, and please do some evaluation of the hands-on between 0 and 10. This is very risky because we're going to see the results. Actually, I have here, I just create a render for the OAI at ICSoc to see. Oh. Well, that's pretty good. Only 4 votes.
Can you put the
So the votes is, yes, sorry, I lose it. Oh, wow. No, this is an old one. Here. Oh, 24. That's pretty good. Well, 28. That's pretty nice. Thank you. The place is here. This is the place. Exactly. Let me put it like this and open like this. So well, 30. Someone is voting more than one time. I'm I'm assuming, but anyway. Well, I'm sure you get the point. Well, so coming back to the presentation. Well, hopefully we got the idea of how can we get advantage of all the different toolings, and these are only 2 of them that I show you, and the list of toolings in the webpage you will see it's quite enormous. So which are the possibilities to get involved in the initiative? Well, there's a very nice web page in the initiative site, and basically there are 3 things that you could do. One is you can help to evolve the spec, because the idea is to have a very agile specification process evolution, not to mimic the traditional specification process are quite hard to go over and over in the versions. And they want to have a very open process, very open process. It is not necessary to be in the initiative at all, yet to propose changes and to propose extensions. You can also leverage the spec by promoting its use, make it publicly available to your students or to get the people use, also to learn about the specs. In this web page, in the how to contribute, you have the links to do it. If you want to evolve the spec, is an open process in GitHub. You just do a pull request over something that you propose to change, and it will be discussed in the technical board whether it is accepted or not, and you get credit for that because a pull request is linked to your to the member. You can, in order to leverage the spec, you have the links to the last version, all the versions of the spec, and in order to get informed, well, of course, Twitter, and there are some meetups in different parts of the world, so you can get all the pointers there. Let me go back. But I will before finish, I would like to stop a little bit from the perspective of research. What about the research possibilities in this initiative? And I will going to tell you our case. This is a sample of something that we are doing from the research perspective, and it was quite fruitful. This is an example of something that we're proposing to extend from the API that is a result of our research of our group in the last years. Specifically, for example, we have specified an SLA language that you can embed to the OAI spec, and with this language, we have proposed some toolings to the community. So, for example, based on this extension that we propose, if you add that elements, saying, for example, that I'm going to do some request limits over some parts, or I will put some cost over some other part. With the tooling that we provide, you can generate automatically this portal for the users to start using API keys with these results, and also working with some API gateways to leverage this. So this is just an example, but the good thing about OpenAPI in our experience is that they are quite open to see different extensions and different elements. And well, everything of the presentation, all the links and all the information is available in the main website of OpenAPI. And I just finished. Thank you all for your patience and for your energy at the end. And thank you very much. And if you want to get tuned or stay tuned, you can see the channel of Twitter. And if you have any questions, thank you very much.
Not a question, just like a comment, because if we have OpenAPI, so it's very easy to generate the code and test, automated test. One of the problems of the OpenAPI is for the listening service, like the Twitter, Facebook, so they don't provide their OpenAPI specifications. Mm-hmm. So I think, for me, I will present a paper in Thursday that can automatically generate the specification of OpenAPI from their HTML documentation. So
that is it's really nice news. It's totally true that there's a lot of APIs out there, and unfortunately, well, it is normal because it's very young initiative now. So all the companies hasn't really embraced it at the moment, but there's a huge push. And if you have toolings or techniques like you are providing, or from generating from the documents, the OpenAPI, it's really interesting, and it's a very nice point. Perhaps could be listed in the, if you have a tool that ready to use for users will be listed in the Open API catalog. I think that's very good. Thank you. Any other comments, questions, or I'm stopping you from resting before the afternoon? Also, then thank you very much. And